a history challenge themed video. Yeah. Hi everyone, it's Jenny. Welcome back to my channel, and here I am in the second week of this readathon, finally getting my shit together with a history themed video that I promised for you. So I have picked my top 10 historical fiction books, but this was a huge caveat that I read a lot of historical fiction, and these were just 10 that I have on my shelves. I know there are a lot more that I haven't included, and I can definitely do another video on another 10 historical fiction books that I love. But the one that I'm going to start with is The Doll Factory, because I have it, but I've lent it out, and I will forget about it otherwise, and there will just be 9 books in this video, and probably no one will notice, but I will be annoyed. So, The Doll Factory is by Jenny, calm down. It's by Elizabeth McNeil. I have banged on about it quite a lot on this channel over the years. It's Victorian, so obviously I love it. It's set in 1850, which is when the Great Exhibition was, where there was this huge crystal palace building, and there was a huge exhibition of all the different things and exports from the British Empire, and it's linked to the Pre-Raphaelites, which is why I also loved it, because I studied them. And it focuses on Iris, who is a woman who becomes a model for a Pre-Raphaelite artist, and also had aspirations of being an artist herself, and she is being followed by this creepy guy called Silas, who is into kind of taxidermy and making weird things. It's a wonderful book because it deals with women and how limited their options were, but how art gave them this new opportunity, I suppose, and also about different art styles, there's a lot about Victorian culture in there and what sold well, and it's just fascinating from that point of view. But it's also quite exciting. It's kind of thriller-esque in the way that Silas pursues Iris, and I just thought it was an incredible debut. I'm very excited to read her second one, which is also set in the Victorian period. Very soon, I'm sure I will read that. Sticking with the Victorian period, because obviously that's my favourite period to read about. This is His Bloody Project by Graham McCrae Burnett, and I love this because it was set in Scotland, which is so rare for a Victorian historical fiction novel to be set outside of England, especially outside of a city. It's set in 1869, and a brutal triple murder has occurred, and it's clever because of the way it's told. It isn't just a straightforward prose narrative. It's told partly through statements of people who know the murderer, partly through the murderer's own account, like a kind of diary that explains what motivated him and led him to commit this triple murder, and then also medical reports and police reports, and then at the end the trial of his murder in court. And it's so clever how it pushes the form of the novel, and I will say it's pretty grisly. I mean, I think you can tell by the title, if you don't like gore, this is not for you, because the murder part is pretty brutal. But it was just such a clever idea that it almost makes you believe that it's real and it happened, and it's just so unique in terms of historical fiction. I've never read a book like this before, so highly recommend this. We are moving on to a different century for a change. This is Margaret I by Danielle Dutton. It is set in the 17th century, so it starts in 1623, but it moves throughout Margaret Cavendish's life, and Margaret Cavendish was a real person, and it leads up to her being the first woman to address the Royal Society and being interested in science and that kind of thing. She wrote the first kind of science fiction novel or something along those lines, and of the genre. Obviously it wasn't a genre at that point, so I think it was called The Burning World, I can't remember, it doesn't say in the blurb. But she was such a fascinating person, and it also has a movement through a lot of places, because it starts with her leaving England because of the Civil War and having to live abroad, and then coming back later on when the monarchy is reinstated and all this that's going on. It's quite a tumultuous time in history, and it's really interesting to look at it from the point of view of a woman, and she's just really cool, and it made me Google her later. So I think this is a great short one if you find historical fiction can be a bit long sometimes. This is a nice one to read. Then I have a book that is just such a stalwart of the historical fiction genre that I had to include it, and it is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I am sort of reading the third one, as in I read a quarter of it and then stopped a long time ago, but this is my favourite still. I think it will remain my favourite. I feel like I almost need to introduce it. It's about Thomas Cromwell during the Tudor period, and this leads up to the point of Jane Seymour being introduced, but Anne Boleyn is still with Henry at this point. So it's It's hard to say anything new about this. I just think it's so well written. I very rarely like books that are written in present tense, but this really worked for me. And he's just an incredible character, and the depth of research is admirable. Is just incredible for this book. So if you like a book that really immerses yourself in all of the day-to-day life, then this is the one for you, for sure. And a book that it is historical fiction, but I would say it's kind of genre bending. This is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. And I say this because it's kind of science fiction meets fantasy meets historical fiction. It's about Dana, who is alive during the 70s. I think this was actually published during the 70s. But she's inexplicably drawn back to 1815 and is linked to an ancestor and when he's in danger of dying. And it's so well written in how she moves between being a free woman, obviously in at that time modern America, and then suddenly being afraid of for her life. And there's a lot of clever links between like ancestry in the past, but like and how that affects the present. And I just thought it was such a special book. Again, it's really loved. There's not much new I can say about this, but I was so glad to read it. And I really need to read more of her books actually. But this was just so strong, and again an interesting like form of historical fiction. If you aren't a super big fan of traditional straightforward historical fiction, then yeah, this is a great one. I will say though, I don't think the time travel is particularly explained, or not even that it isn't explained, more that there isn't as big of a reaction to it as I thought there would be, but I'm okay with it because it's still a great book. Yeah. So we are moving on to Old Baggage by Alyssa Evans, which I know I've also been on about a lot. This is set in 1928. I like books that are set around the interwar years or World War years. I think interwar is actually a very interesting historical period, and it follows Mattie Simpson, who was a strong suffragette, and now she's kind of at a loss for a cause because women have the vote, and it's kind of about her despairing that women aren't actually politically engaged, and creating a girl group to be encouraging to make women more adventurous, and all the hilarity that comes out of that. It's just a wonderful book because it's so heartwarming, but also just really thought-provoking in the sense that I didn't really think about what it would be like if you were a suffragette who had gone to prison and been part of fighting for this cause, and then suddenly were disappointed with the outcome of actually having gotten the vote if women were still going to just vote for whoever their husband voted for. So it's great, and also it's an older woman who is single, and that I also really enjoyed that too. It's just quite nice to read books that aren't all set around romance sometimes, and it's very funny. Don't know if I mentioned that. Very funny. Please read. Yes. Then going back to the Victorian period, had to happen, guys. This is Bodies of Light by Sarah Moss. I've read 4 of her books. This is definitely my favourite. I think she has some other historical fiction books which I need to check out, but I've heard that this is the best one. And this is again interesting because it's mainly set in Manchester. So that was nice to look at a northern city, which was so important during the Victorian period in terms of being the industrial heart of the country. And again, I like it because it focuses on artists and the kind of Pre-Raphaelite or arts and crafts movement. There we go, movement of art. But it follows Ali and May, who are sisters, and the different paths that are laid before them. But what I love about this book is that each chapter starts with a description of a painting that their father or one of their artist friends had done. And I really liked reading a chapter and then going back and reading the description of the painting and then that adding meaning to it. And I love the relationship between words and the visual. It's just a really brilliantly written book. I will say that it jumps forward in time quite a lot in each chapter, so in some ways you can feel, I think some people might feel a bit distanced when they're reading this book because of the time jumps, but I think it's actually really clever and again just quite a unique way of showing how time has passed and showing development in their characters like through the art. And I just like books that focus on women during these times, and their mother is very religious, so looking at again what was expected of women, but how her mother actually is really hoping that her daughter, I think it's Ali, will go on to be a doctor, and what was restricted, what was also slowly opening up in the later Victorian period for women. It's just fascinating and also frustrating at the same time, but so good. Would highly recommend. Obviously, I highly recommend all of these books, I don't know why I'm saying that. The next book is really hard to describe, but it's also very beloved. It is The Night Watch by Sarah Waters, who pretty much just writes historical fiction, and I've read half her books, and this is my fave, and it probably will always be my fave, I think. It starts in 1947 and works its way backwards to 1941, which sounds weird, but it really works. It follows four characters. So you have Kay, who was an ambulance driver during World War II, Helen, who is someone who's just so in need of love and is harboring a secret war. And you have Viv, a glamorous woman who is really faithful to her soldier lover, who is married, so that's kind of awkward. And you also have Duncan. So he's someone that seems quite naive and innocent, and again you work out as you read backwards what has happened to him, and it's just so wonderful how London is depicted during the war and after the war as well. It's tender, it's poignant, it's heartfelt, it's tragic, it's lots of things, but I just loved how the timeline makes you slowly, how it develops the characters in such a different way, and it's just so intricately interwoven how they meet and interact, and how alliances are formed, and how experiences affect each other. I just think it's astounding, and I don't know what else was nominated for the Man Booker that year, but I'm amazed it didn't win. Such a good book, woo! Then I have, The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, which I think I said before was set in the 80s. It's not, it's set in the 60s, but it is about Elwood, who is an unfortunate college student, or almost college student, but he gets arrested in a stolen car and is sent to the Nickel Academy, where he meets Turner, and they have very different opposing views. So the Nickel Academy is a young offenders institute essentially, but it's segregated, it's horrifically racist obviously because of the time period, and Elwood is a huge advocate for Dr. King's idea of how you should sort of like your enemies, but Turner is trying to survive basically, and is a lot less naive, I think. So seeing how their different ideologies collide and how their friendship builds from that is just wonderful, and it has such a good twist, but also quite brutal violence in this, and trigger warnings for that if you don't deal well with that, because wow, there are some scenes that are quite hard to read in this, but it's so brilliant. I like this even more than The Underground Railroad by him as well, which is also very good, but yeah, this like really took it right to a next level, for me at least. And then last but not least, we have Washington Black by S.C. Edugam. And this follows the slave called Washington Black, who at the beginning of the book is 11 in Barbados, and he's called Wash for short. He becomes assistant to Christopher Wilde, who is known as Titch, and is a kind of inventor, abolitionist dude, and he was once Wash to help him build an aerial machine. So it's fun from that point of view of invention and their relationship. And then something happens and Wash gets into trouble, and then he's in fear of his life and they must escape. So it moves through so many different places. It goes to Nova Scotia, it goes to Morocco. It's pretty well travelled as a narrative, I suppose, but I will say it ended a little bit abruptly, like just a teeny bit, but I just had such a good time because also you see different attitudes towards black people and slavery while he moves around and wherever he is in the world, and it's just incredible prose. I mean, all these books are well written, but I love her work. I still haven't read her first book, which is just ridiculous because I've had it for years. That's a reminder to self, because that is also historical fiction. So I loved this. I hope her first book is just as good, but I would really recommend this if you want a book about a slave that isn't really depressing, and it isn't all on the same plantation, because he does move away from Barbados, and that's quite nice, really, let's be honest. So that is my top 10, at least kind of so far. Caveat, love a lot of other books I haven't mentioned here today. So tell me, what are your favourite historical fiction books, or are any of these your favourite? I wouldn't be surprised if someone else loves Wolfall out there, because I mean, she sold a lot of copies. It's done well, yeah. But I will see you soon for another History Challenge video before this readathon is quite over. I hope it's going well if you're joining in, and I hope if you're not, that you're just reading good stuff. And I will see you soon for Bookish Shenanigans. Bye!